Welcome to the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Our mission is to help executives become better cyber risk managers. We are your hosts. I'm Kip Boyle, CEO of Cyber Risk Opportunities.
And I'm Jake Bernstein, Cybersecurity Counsel at the law firm of Newman DuWors.
And this is the show where we help you become a better cyber risk manager.
The show is sponsored by Cyber Risk Opportunities and Newman DuWors LLP. If you have questions about your cybersecurity related legal responsibilities,
and if you want to manage your cyber risks just as thoughtfully as you manage risks in other areas of your business, such as sales, accounts receivable, and order fulfillment, then you should become a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program, which you can do for a fraction of the cost of hiring a single cybersecurity expert. You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com.
So, Kip, what are we going to talk about today?
Okay, Jake, today we're going to talk about the past because as we all know that you need to understand history in order to understand the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think all too often we as humans tend to forget the history. So what past are we talking about?
Well, we're only going to go back about 30 years. And for some of our listeners, I think, they're going to be like, oh yeah, 30 years, I remember that, and then for other listeners, they're going to be like, I don't think I was born then.
Well, I was born, but I was a kid. So why don't you tell me what happened 30 years ago that's interesting for cybersecurity?
Yeah. So we're talking about 1986. So in 1986, there's this cybersecurity inflection point that stands out to me and is worthy of reflecting on in our show today because, we'll get into that, but let me just tell you what the inflection point is. There is a book, in fact, that documents this, and it's the theft of military technologies, secret technologies, and it was an online theft in 1986, believe it or not. And it was a crime committed by a group that became known as the Hanover Hackers, and Hanover being a city in Germany that they were associated with. The book it's documented in is called The Cuckoo's Egg. You can still find it on Amazon. It's still in print. The author is named Cliff Stoll. S-T-O-L-L. Cliff is an astronomer. Actually, he was an out-of-work astronomer when he stumbled into this online theft. And the book is all about what happened.
Wait a second. Was there an internet in 1986?
Actually, yeah. Actually, there was. So before the internet as we know it today, the internet actually used to be called DARPANet. DARPA as an acronym for Defense Advanced Research Projects. I probably butchered the hell out of that acronym just now, but anyway, but yeah, there actually was, starting in 1969, I believe, was the first attempt to connect computers over long distance, and by 1986, those connections were alive and well. It was a mashup of dial-up modems, expensive leased lines, but yeah, we had a nascent global internet in 1986.
That's interesting, and I have to admit that The Cuckoo's Egg is actually the next book on my reading list, but I haven't read it yet. So what's so special about this book?
All right. Well, there's a lot of cool things about this book. So, first of all, it's a great read. I don't know if Cliff Stoll had anybody helping him, but in addition to being an out-of-work astronomer, he's also a very good author. And so, one of the things I love about this book is anybody can pick it up and read it and understand it. He does a very, very good job of breaking down the technology that inevitably is discussed in the book into concepts that can be understood by anybody, and that's particularly needed today because a lot of the technology was pretty old.
That is actually amazing because I had a computer in probably the late 80s, maybe 89, and I recall it was maybe a Tandy from Radio Shack, and I think it only had like a 5 1/4 inch disk drive. I mean, basically we're talking about stone tools.
Yeah, definitely. So that was one thing about the book, and I commend everybody to go and get this book. It's a paperback book. It's going to cost you nothing to get it, and you're gonna be, not only are you going to be entertained, but you're going to get a lot of the details that we're going to talk about in our episode today. And so that's one reason why this book is so special. It's eminently readable, and I, and it's worth your time. But the other reason why this is such a special inflection point is because many of the techniques that were used by the Hanover hackers in the theft of these secret military technologies are in use by cyber attackers today, and many of the things that Cliff Stoll did to discover this and to track them down and ultimately achieve not only a stop of the Hanover hackers, but actually convictions, legal convictions. We're still using the same techniques today.
Yeah, interesting. And in fact, this book is not just available on a paperback. It's been translated to modern technology, so you can buy it on Kindle too.
Ah, okay, good.
And just so everyone is clear, we have absolutely no interest in the book sales at all. We just think it's a cool book.
Right. I mean, if you go buy this book, we'll earn nothing. but hopefully, Mr. Stoll is still earning something off this book. It's that good. But let me give you some examples. I told you that that many of the things that the book talks about are actually still in use today. Obviously, the technology has changed a tremendous amount, but the core concepts, believe it or not, have not changed. So first of all, as we already said, there was a global computer network in use.
DARPANET.
Yeah, in 1986. And what was happening? A foreign government was conducting espionage against the United States through a global computer network in 1986, and that's still going on today.
Not only it's still going on today, that was probably, I don't know if we may never know if that was a one-off in 1986, but let's just say that it's happening every millisecond of every day.
It is, yeah. And back then it was Soviet spies, or their proxies in Germany, right? But today,
that would have been East Germany for those not old enough to remember the difference.
That's right. In 1986, Germany was still partitioned into two countries as a result of the fallout of World War II. And so we had East Germany and East Berlin under the influence of the Soviet Union, and West Berlin and West Germany under the influence of the Western Allies, the United States, Great Britain, and France. So, and Hanover, I believe at the time, was located in East Germany. And well, of course, today, what do we have? We've got every nation on the face of the planet has spun up an espionage capability based on the internet and the high speed and reach.
And it's more accessible than ever. I mean, you don't need to be a rich, wealthy first world nation to engage in cyber espionage. And North Korea has proven that better than anyone.
Right. And in fact, technology is so comparatively easy today that you don't even need to be technologically proficient. I mean, if you can go down to a store and, online or otherwise, buy a computer and plug it into a high-speed internet connection, you're good to go. So back in 1986, it took a lot of special skills, but clearly it doesn't anymore.
A lot of special equipment too was probably very expensive, and all of that has changed, I would say, completely.
Yeah, and if you read the book, you'll see how Cliff had to type, commands at a command line. There's no graphical user interfaces available.
But hey, let's be honest. Everyone who really knows how to use a computer still uses the command line, right? That's the joke, at least.
That's the joke, at least, right? Yeah, I can't even remember the last time I typed a command. Anyway, so here's something else that was that you'll read about in the book that still is going on, which is the attackers, the Hanover hackers, actually used multiple hops through several different computers before they actually attacked. And why did they do that? Because they knew that it would be very difficult to discover who they were if they went through other computers before they actually attacked, right? So this anonymity was definitely going on back then and is still going on now.
Yeah, it's that's a super useful technique. It's VPNs are a little different, but if you look around, you can hop through different VPN networks if you want to really conceal your origin. In fact, the entire Tor network, the Tor browser, isn't that its entire function, is to basically automatically route you through, tens, if not dozens upon dozens of locations.
Yeah, you can actually control that, and so there's obviously advantages to anonymity in the world today. We want there to be the opportunity to be anonymous in certain cases, but obviously it's not a good feature of the internet when it's being used by malicious people. But that's still going on today. Another example of, and by the way, Cliff Stoll spends a great chunk of the book trying to figure out how to de-anonymize the attackers so that he can figure out where they're coming from, and that's part of the thrill of reading that book is watching him try all kinds of different techniques in order to figure this out. But the other thing that another thing that these cyber attackers were doing in 1986 is they were landing on computers, typically with guest accounts or open logins. Many of the computers back in 1986 did not require you to identify yourself in order to get onto the computer. The internet was built not with confidentiality in mind. It was built to share information. And so what would happen is the Hanover hackers would land on a computer, and then they would perform some kind of an exploit in order to turn their privileges from regular to administrator, or as Cliff talks about it, root or super user. There's different names for a highly privileged account, but the point is that they had to escalate their privileges over and over and over again, and that's exactly what happens today.
So, okay, you said earlier that Mr. Stoll was an astronomer and he was out of work. How did he get involved in this?
Yeah, so really, really interesting, documented in the book. So he was working on some basic astronomy. His government funding ran out, and he didn't know when he was going to get more funding to work on, good old-fashioned astronomy. And so he needed to eat. So he went looking around the university. I believe he was working at Berkeley at the time. So he went around the university looking for something to do to earn some money while he waited for his next grant, his next science grant to show up. And lo and behold, they had a computer center, and there was work to be done. Now, it was not glamorous work by any stretch of the imagination, and in fact, this leads us into something else that was going on in 1986 that still goes on today, which is the way that Cliff Stoll figured out that something fishy was going on is one of his tasks was to reconcile the accounting of computer time so that when the different departments in the university were charged for the time that they spent using the computer,
wait.
those charges were accurate.
People used to get charged by the minute for using a computer?
Yeah, that's right. Just like people used to get charged by the minute to make long-distance phone calls.
Both of those things seem very strange to even to me as a child of the 80s. But my kids would have absolutely no understanding of that concept at all.
Yeah, but technology used to be really expensive, and so and it had to be paid for somehow, and so there were all these chargeback schemes, as they were called, and people wanted to make sure that they got a bill that was accurate, right? And so this is not glamorous work by any stretch of the imagination.
No, this sounds horrible.
No, it was very tedious. But as an astronomer, he was kind of used to tedium, so it wasn't so bad for him. But he talks about how he discovered he was reconciling two chargeback systems, and he found a 75-cent accounting error. And he just started scratching and scratching and scratching into that. 75 cents, even in 1986, wasn't that much money.
No, that's definitely one of those things like where it gets into your head, it burrows in there, and it just bothers you, and you spend way more time thinking about it than it is worth. But
Yep.
where did it lead him?
Yeah. So if I remember correctly in the book, his supervisor is like 75 cents is not material. Don't worry about it. But you're right. Cliff could not let it go. And so he just went crazy trying to figure out what was up with that 75-cent error. But what this points out is the importance of event logging, conducting regular event reviews, and promptly investigating suspicious system events. And we still need to do that today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, that is, I would say in that sense, nothing has changed. I mean, in order to investigate a cyber attack, you follow the trail of clues just like any other police investigator has for 100 years.
Right. Now, the difference today, of course, is that the amount of logging that we're having to deal with is just overwhelming. I mean, human beings are not good at doing log reviews, period, no matter how long those logs are. I mean, you go over just a handful or, a dozen of lines of detail and people's eyes just glaze over. So,
Yeah.
but today we've got logging that is pulling in terabytes of data, by the day, by the hour, depending on, how aggressive you're getting on this. And really machine learning and artificial intelligence are going to be very, very important going forward in looking for those needles in all of these haystacks, right? So the scale of this is definitely different than it was back in the time of the cuckoo's egg, but yeah, still a deal. Here's another example. Today we talk about active defense. And active defense, some people think of it as hacking back. Like you attack my computer, I'm going to attack you back to
Right.
make you go away. Well, so active defense is actually a better term than hack back, and I don't think they're synonymous. But active defense is sort of a gray zone between passive defenses like a firewall and offensive actions like hacking back. But inside of active defense, we have an idea of a honeypot. And a honeypot is like a cache of fake documents or maybe even a fake computer that looks real to an attacker. And the idea of a honeypot is you want to put out something that attackers will find pretty quickly that looks very, very interesting to them. And what it does is it slows them down. And it gives you an opportunity to know that they're in your network and then to do something about it, whether it's, hey, I'm going to study the attacker and try to understand, what their intent is, or, or hey, I'm just going to let them get away with this fake data because then, they're going to maybe not come back and get my real stuff. But Cliff Stoll created a honeypot of fake documents. And what he did is, while these hackers were poring over the fake documents, trying to decide, is this, are these files describing a military technology that we want? While they were doing that, Cliff Stoll initiated tracking. And he actually pioneered something that had really never been done before, which is AT&T was the dominant carrier at the time. This is, again, before we had multiple competing telephone companies. Sorry, people not old enough to remember that. But so he got AT&T, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the West German government to take this seriously and to actually trace the phone lines that were being used and the leased lines and the telecom all the way back to Germany, all the way back to Hanover, across international lines. And it was the use of this honeypot that created the opportunity for him to do this. And it took months, by the way, as you'll read in the book. And
Yeah.
we're still doing this today.
So I mean, that's a good point. I think it's important to realize that any arrest and conviction of a cyber attacker these days um, is the result of heroic efforts. That's why they make a good story. That's why people go to conferences, and these stories can serve as keynote addresses to the audience because they are so fascinating and so heroic. But that is that's maybe a little distressing, that given the technology change, that we aren't any better at tracking these guys down. So what does the cuckoo's egg tell us about the future of cyber risk? It seems a little frightening, maybe.
Yeah, well, so I think it tells us a few things. One thing that it tells us is cyber risks are getting worse, not better.
I agree with that. Why do we say that, though?
Well, so I don't believe that humanity has really effectively dealt with a fundamental shift in reality that occurred with the rise of the internet. And we can see it in 1986 in its very, very limited deployment, right? Very, very limited number of nodes on the internet back then. And we're just starting to see this fundamental shift in reality. And now it's really on us. And I think until we deal with this shift, I mean, it's just going to keep getting worse. And here's the shift. Crime and military action is now independent of geography, both in terms of reach and in terms of speed.
And I would add to that, so is communication in general, and even more importantly, economic action and commerce.
Well, and that's the beauty of it, right?
That is the beauty of it. But
that's what makes the internet great.
It is, and I have some thoughts on this, which is, one, you talked about a shift of reality. Well, in the next 30 years, we are going to be wearing augmented reality headsets that modify what we see with our eyes based upon a computer. And if that is hackable, then, that might be, that idea becomes a lot less philosophical when what you actually see could change and be faked based upon the internet.
Right.
So that's a point right there. You talk about crime and military action across the internet at light speed. What if I'm able to, when you're driving your car, or maybe when your car is driving itself, just up and decide to tell your car that there is a wall in front of it and it needs to turn left into an actual wall. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you literally affect reality.
Yeah, right. Because these cars, these autonomous vehicles, are going to have sensors, and it's that sensor that if you can fool it, if you can actually convince it that it's receiving data other than what is, what it should be receiving, what the reality of the situation is, then you can trigger all kinds of interesting effects with the vehicle, just like you described. And so, and that's really no different from today, right? When I attack a computer, I'm faking that computer out. I'm giving it all kinds of crazy input, and I'm making it do things that the people who stood that computer up never intended for it to do.
And let's be honest, it's not just cars. I mean, we already have augmentations that give us, the ability to see in light spectra that normal human eyes can't see in. But it's all electronic, right? It isn't even a stretch to assume that someone could be given ultrasonic sight to compensate for blindness, and that system could be hacked. So clearly, this is it's not just the cyber risks. They're not getting worse just because there's more of them. They're getting worse because they will be able to affect a much larger percentage of life.
Right. So as we take all of the wonderful things that the internet has given to us and build on those wonderful things as a foundation, right? We start building on top of that. This fundamental shift of reality continues to affect all of those things. Anything you build on top of the internet is going to inherit the independent of geography nature of the internet. And there's other fundamental differences, but I think that one's really important, because what it means is that if I'm sitting here in my house with my VR headset on and I don't have protection, then that means that potentially somebody in another part of the world can mess with my headset.
Yeah.
which would never be possible before the rise of the internet.
Yeah. And I have experienced the difference that the internet makes in the court system and in the practice of law, really for the last 10, 11 years. And let me tell you that the, traditional jurisprudence and law about personal jurisdiction and where you can be sued and, the reach of our court system uh, is completely tied in knots when you introduce the internet, and whether it's a civil lawsuit against a potential scammer or if it's a criminal lawsuit and you're trying to arrest someone, we have Interpol, we have we have certain international bodies, but let's be honest, um, the legal systems that we've set up cannot handle a global internet where I can be sitting in a non-extradition, hostile country to the U.S. and do things to the U.S.
Right.
with impunity.
Yeah.
Impunity.
And that's part of this geographical shift, right? Is that not only does it let me reach with light speed places on the globe that I could never have done before, but it also frees me from the geographic realities of international borders and everything that's built on international borders, like law enforcement and governance.
Yeah, no, that's a big part of it. So, okay, so I'm convinced, you're convinced. The internet changes things. It's a revolution in conflict, you might say. What does that mean for the future?
Well, so very few of us are alive now that remember the emergence of nuclear weapons and what a fundamental shift of reality that was. So 1945, right, we explode the first atomic bombs, and we've struggled ever since to figure out how to govern these things so that we don't destroy each other. And particularly in the beginning, nobody really knew what to do. And I think we're repeating a similar path where we had to figure out how to harness nuclear weapons. I would submit we still don't really have them under complete control, but we've figured out how to deal with them to a certain degree. We're going to need to figure out how to deal with this revolution and conflict. And I think we're just at the very beginnings of doing that. And I think it's going to take at least the next 30 years to sort this out. It's taken 30 years to get to this point, and I'm sorry to say, but I just don't see any quick, easy answers on the horizon. So I'm going to forecast another 30 years before we get to a good place.
I think so, and I think that we haven't had the we haven't had the end of World War II experience with cyber war yet. It's all been very small scale. It's been very, there's been painful attacks, particularly in the Ukraine. But in terms of a worldwide, oh my God, let's not do that again, that has not happened yet.
No.
And it's so you're right. We're it's early stages. Unlike nuclear weapons, cyber war and cyber weapons are much more scalable, you might say. You can have pinpoint attacks, you can have large scale damage, whereas a nuke is a weapon of mass destruction, period.
Right. Well, and digital weapons can lead to mass casualty.
Oh, they can.
We saw that with NotPetya. But one thing about cyber weapons that's very different from nuclear weapons is it's very hard for a nuclear weapon to fall into the hands of a small band of guerrilla fighters, and that they would be able to use that credibly to take over. Maybe you could say suitcase-sized nukes and that sort of business, but even still, it takes a lot of special talent and special handling in order to do anything with a nuclear device, compared to what happens when a cyber weapon gets dropped into the hands of ordinary criminals.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and it's the fear of the suitcase bomb is it is, couldn't be more obvious in popular culture. I can't even count the number of novels, movies, video games, etc., where the central plot is this idea, right?
Yep.
But yet in cyber, uh, it's it's almost like it's already such reality that it's not even worth writing movies about. There aren't many, the popular, in terms of pop culture, most of the time it's wrong when it comes to cyber weapons, which I think is an interesting fact to point out in this podcast, because what it means is that not even our fiction writers know what it means yet.
No, I mean, cyber is very abstract, very difficult to comprehend. The consequences of cyber battles are not often tangible. I mean, today the big consequences are really data breaches, but people are pretty well insulated from the consequences of data breaches to this point. So it's irritating, annoying, and so forth, but it hasn't actually caused anybody any great cost, right? So like, I'm not sure that we've had death, or mass property destruction yet as as a direct consequence of cyber attacks.
At least not in the U.S. I think that there are stories, at least, that a Russian cyber weapon was able to shut down heating in Ukraine in the middle of
Right.
winter, which
Right.
almost certainly caused death, but none that we have been apprised
Yeah,
of.
but I think the links there, you're probably right, but I think even the links there are kind of weak.
They are.
People would say, well, the person died because the heat was off.
Well,
And
which is true.
which is true, but you've got to unpack that a little bit more.
Why did
And
the heat go off?
and the evidence isn't as conclusive, right? We can look at the evidence and say we're pretty sure this is what happened, but unlike a bomb, there's no crater, right? There's no smoking hole in the ground that says this is what happened, and we're going to collect the bomb fragments and we're going to analyze them, and then we're going to
At least not.
where
At
this.
least not yet. I mean,
Yeah.
with the NotPetya attack, there kind of was. We knew. I mean, there was smoking holes blown into balance sheets
Right.
around various
Right.
corporations.
Yeah,
And
it was a $10 billion
yeah,
collective damage, and yet what happened? Nothing. Nothing. There was no repercussion for having released that. There was no sanctions. I mean, really nothing happened as a result of it. And I think ordinary people, when they see no repercussions from one government to the next as a result of a cyber attack, it just reinforces the idea that this stuff's ethereal and doesn't matter.
yeah, and even if there was a reaction, it was not publicized, which means that if it didn't have at least 10 minutes of media time, it didn't happen.
Right. But
Which is
looking into the future, I see more ambiguity, more gray, but also more consequences, more real world consequences from cyber attacks. The loss, not only the loss of data and the loss of money, but the loss of life, the loss of infrastructure, right? In other words, we can't, the power is going to go out and it's going to stay out for days, and then water pressure is going to drop, and then people are going to have to be carrying water in buckets. And I mean, I think something like that's probably going to need to happen in order for people to really feel it viscerally, like this has got to change. And even at that point, we won't have an easy answer.
no.
I mean, we're going to have new technologies. We mentioned artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all that. But what we desperately need is a new way to govern ourselves.
It's true. And, it's interesting. You think about when that happens from a natural disaster, there's been a lot of hurricanes recently that have caused incredible damage. The fires in California, what happens? The world knows, everyone sees it. There are emergencies declared. The law takes, legal mechanisms go into action to release funds. Donation drives occur. People are emotionally affected. Imagine if the power goes out for no other reason than someone decided they didn't like us and they wanted to fire off a cyber weapon at us. That would change people's perceptions.
Yeah, I think it would, and I think that's where we're going to have to be in order to do something. But the one thing that I do want to highlight in our episode before we do a wrap is there are some people who are trying to tackle this, which I applaud anybody who has a great idea, who'd like to try to figure out, how do we find a better way to govern ourselves? Brad Smith, who's Microsoft's president and chief legal officer, is actively pursuing on the international stage something that he's calling a digital Geneva Convention. And I think we absolutely need things like this.
I agree. I think that, in this world, we must have the only thing that, we're a world of laws. And even though not every nation is a nation of laws, that's how we govern ourselves. And some kind of digital Geneva Convention we need to update international law to not only protect people, but also to prosecute offenders, to punish nations that violate these norms.
Right.
Look at the response that President Trump unleashed on the Syrian military when it was, strongly concluded, without even necessarily being hard proof, that chemical weapons were used. That's a violation of international norms, international law. And I think that the response that prompted was quite real. Dozens of cruise missiles were fired from American warships directly into Syria. I'm not saying that that's what was going to happen, but it's going to have to be something similar, so that there are consequences for using these types of weapons.
Yeah, for using cyber weapons to cause mass damage. Yeah, yep. Absolutely. Well, so that wraps up this episode of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Today we talked about what the next 30 years of cyber risk may have in store for us. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast.
Remember that cyber risk management is a team sport and needs to incorporate management, your legal department, HR, and IT for full effectiveness.
And management's goal should be to create an environment where practicing good cyber hygiene is supported and encouraged by every employee. So if you want to manage your cyber risks and ensure that your company enjoys the benefits of good cyber hygiene, then please contact us and consider becoming a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program.
You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.